Hi everyone, my name is Jane Hobson, editor at PAX Tech and PAX International magazines, and I'm super excited to be here today hosting this Women Behind Aviation panel with a few phenomenal women in the industry. Today we're going to be discussing career paths, current and future initiatives to increase diversity in leadership roles and the workforce in general, as well as some immediate challenges for the industry to address. So thanks so much to each of you for joining me today. I think that we'll start with an introduction, and let's begin with Jane Hoskison at IATA.
Jane, thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm Jane Hoskison. I'm the Director of Talent, Learning, Engagement and Diversity at IATA, and obviously here today talking about diversity and, really thinking about women behind aviation. And what we want is more women in front of aviation, leading aviation. And that's one of the things that we're doing with a big initiative you may be familiar with, which is called 25 by 2025, and the purpose of that is to increase the representation of women within the industry, so that the old adage, if you can't be what you can't see, the more great women that we can see in aviation, the more we can inspire more women to come and join us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. Next, we'll hear from Karen Mcalpin at Secasui Kydex.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm the design director at Secasui Kydex. Secasui Kydex is a global manufacturer of thermoplastics, but my background is from an airline perspective. I had 25 years with a North American carrier, 18 of which focused on aircraft interiors. So I bring that to the table today, and I'm really interested in talking about how we can encourage girls and young women to pursue STEM fields that might translate into engineering or other opportunities in aviation. And I can talk a little bit about how airlines are structured and opportunities for women beyond being a flight attendant.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. And then we also have Erin Lear with us today of Jet Token and Birdie Academy.
Hi guys, yes, my name is Erin Lear. I am the Executive Sales Director for Jet Token. I am also the woman behind Birdie Academy, which is a predominantly female aviation school. So my goal is to help get more women interested and excited about aviation and pursuing their dreams of being a pilot. I also have a entertainment company called Jet Blondie. So a lot of that is used to kind of help inspire more women to get more involved in aviation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, again. I think a great place to start would be maybe to go back to Jane at IATA. I want to know a little bit more about the 20 by 25 initiative, and specifically what you mentioned about, how having more diversity in the industry, how can that affect not only women, but the industry in full?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background to the initiative, actually. So for any of you that are familiar with IATA, every time we do an annual general meeting once a year, there's often a photograph of all of the CEOs of the airlines. And a couple of years ago, one of these photographs was taken and the press said, oh no, not another photo of white male CEOs of airline industries. And it kind of really resonated with people. And of course got us thinking, there are not enough female CEOs. I think there's 6 that we count amongst our membership, and it's not very many. And so we also, in 2019, we launched the Diversity and Inclusion Awards. And one of the winners of the awards was a CEO called Christopher Luxon. And he accepted the award on behalf of Air New Zealand, because they're doing some fantastic stuff around diversity, equity and inclusion. And he said, enough. We cannot be here in 5 more years talking about the fact that we need more women in industry and not having moved the dial. And he said, and I'm looking at you, IATA, to help us do that. And of course, that was a bit of an aha moment around, well, what can we actually do? Because we're not an airline, but we do represent all of the airlines. And so we said, well, what can we do? We can't say, 50-50 by in the next 5 years, because we already know that the pipeline of talent isn't enough for things like pilots. It's 7-8 years for pilots to be in the pipeline. So he kind of said, well, what if we moved the dial? And we were very purposeful in the way that we moved the dial. And so we said, could we by 2025 increase senior female representation by 25% or by 25%? And what if we did the same for pilots? Because if you look at most airline stats, it's between 6 and 11% of female pilots that they have. Now, you're not going to get in the next 5 years to 25%, but you can improve your number by 1, 2, 3%. And, and of course, that makes a really big difference if you can start to move everyone forward. So we came up with this initiative of 25 by 2025, deceptively simple in some regards, very, very difficult to implement in many others. And we've brought together a number of different airlines. It will be 75 airlines that are joining us on this initiative. And that represents, just under 50% of all of the traffic for the main airlines, and, which is really significant. So we bring them together, and the idea is, collectively, we can share best practice, we can work together, we can understand how we can shine a light on great talent within the industry. So that was the kind of how 25 by 2025 was born. Now, of course, you can say, well, 25 by 2025, do you think we could get 30% by 2030? 35% by 2035? Maybe. And maybe you could say, could we get to 50% by 2050? We know that the World Economic Forum has said that COVID has pushed all of the endeavors on gender equality back by a generation. So, they think it's going to be 135 years before we get gender parity. I think that that's why this initiative is so important for us in aviation, because it helps us drive it forward for the whole of the industry. So a little bit of background on what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Erin, I'm wondering what you're thinking about, how do we go about creating an intentional space for female pilots?
Absolutely. So that's what Birdie Academy was originally. That's how I came up with the idea, was to shift those numbers and the stigmas within the unequalness of female pilots versus male pilots. And so Birdie Academy will strongly focus on a marketing plan that shares not only my experience personally being the face of the company, but also other women's experiences, and how it's not that unachievable. We can make it happen. And I also want to bring in the factor that we want to roll out the school with the electric airplanes. So hopefully within the next, I would say 2 to 4 years, hopefully we'll be able to bring those costs down for obtaining a pilot's license. And so therefore that might drum up a lot of intriguement to for females, not just females, but also males, but mainly we want to focus on females to go for it, and make it happen. So that's really the vision there. So I do think that it's within the next 2 to 4 years, hopefully we're going to see those numbers start to go up.
Right. Karen, in terms of, creating a space and keeping young girls and women interested, what's your take on kind of this, making the educational part accessible?
I'm really excited to hear what IATA is doing, because I think that is such a wonderful thing for the industry to pursue. I agree with Jane that there is not equal representation from a diversity standpoint. And so I think we as an industry have an obligation and the opportunity to help young women and girls pursue STEM careers. So STEM would be science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for those who aren't familiar with it, but I think most people are at this point. And there's been some very interesting research on education and girls. And some of the research shows that as early as preschool, that teachers and parents are dissuading girls from pursuing careers that have anything to do with math. They're sort of being held back. And by second grade, boys are indicating that they feel really good about their math abilities, and girls are starting to feel a little bit unsure about it. So that just perpetuates itself. And if we as an industry can help better illustrate opportunities for women in aviation, that will help decrease some of the lack of diversity that we're seeing. So some of those opportunities might include fairs where companies or airlines, for example, are helping women understand what opportunities there are available to them. So when I'm talking about STEM, I'm primarily thinking about engineers. Some of the research that I did indicated that only 21% of engineering majors as of 2019 were female. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to encourage women to go into aviation engineering. Erin has spoken about pilots, and some of the other opportunities available to women at airlines include fields that people don't typically think of. So I came up through advertising and promotions and went into product development and branding, but that was sort of the traditional pink ghetto, if you will. And I think there are many other opportunities for women that no one thinks about in a corporation. So finance or becoming a corporate lawyer, representing the airline, and of course, human resources, which is more of a traditional female role. But there are many, many other opportunities there, purchasing and the engineering field with technical operations and so forth. So the team that I worked on from an aircraft interiors standpoint had quite a few women on it, which was really exciting. And we worked very closely with more of our male counterparts in the engineering department. And as I've attended the Aircraft Interiors Expo over the last couple of years, I've been really excited as young female engineers have come to our booth and talked to me about our product. And I'm just thrilled to see them and hear about what they're doing for major airframers and seat manufacturers. And the opportunities are absolutely unlimited.
A lot of what we're talking about, as Jane had mentioned, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I know is a major focus for IATA at the heart of the restart. So how does this, like, what are some of the very real ways then that having, you know, more diversity, more women in leadership roles, for example, in the industry, what are some real ways that this affects, I mean, passengers? How does it affect, you know, the day-to-day experience of the aviation industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all feeling the effects of the pandemic, and of course, one of the areas that was male dominated from a customer point of view was business class flying, and it tended for a long time to be very kind of male dominated. We know that that's going to be one of the areas that is the slowest to recover, but one of the areas that is recovering quickly, and we start to see it, is leisure travel, but like high-end leisure travel. And I think the statistic is something like 95% of those decision makers for high-end luxury travel tend to be women. Well, I mean, that already tells you something really interesting, because if you haven't got a product at that top end of the luxury market that appeals to women in the way that they're buying the product, you know, and we purchase things in very different ways to men. I think that, you know, that's kind of really important, that there are different characteristics in the way that we're actually making our purchasing and buying decisions. Then you're going to end up in a situation where you've got a load of great products, but they may not be actually the right products for your target market. And, you know, I kind of share this example very, very frequently. I'm not very tall. I'm 160, and you know, most business class seats, they're really comfy, but sometimes I feel like Alice in Wonderland when I sit on them, because I can't touch the floor when we're taking off. Now that sounds ridiculous, but I'd love to get in a business class seat and feel like it was fit for me. Now, of course, the challenge with design is that you've probably got me, and then perhaps the next person is a gentleman who's, you know, 6'3", and he's, you know, he's like, oh, my knees are up around my ears. So you have to get a balance. But, you know, that's the really important word. You have to get a balance that reflects the demographic of the world, because, you know, despite all of the changes in the world, the demographic of the world is still 50-50, more or less. I think it's 49% females, 51% men, but it's still kind of around that 50-50 mark. And, you know, and of course we need to reflect that in the organizations that we have. And it's not just about product design. It's about the way in which you market to people. It's the way in which you think about engineering. I mean, we all know the very obvious examples that even in our cars, the seat belts are designed not for a female. You know, they're designed around a kind of a male body. Now that's slowly changing, but it's very, very slow. And we know even regulations and safety regulations around female flight attendants, they have different physical ailments to men, and they have different physical requirements to men. So how do we make sure that we're thinking about standards for all of these things that accommodate both of those different needs? And the only way to do that is to make sure we've got great representation in all of the way through the airlines and all of the products and services and departments in an airline, which is why I think that putting diversity and inclusion at the heart of the restart is really important. And we're hearing that from our airlines. We talk to our airlines on a regular basis, and one of the things that they're saying is they tried really hard to not lose the progress that they've made. And now that some of them are starting to feel they're in a position to really restart their airlines, they're actually using it as an opportunity to be mindful and purposeful about the way in which they're building back and restarting, which I think is absolutely critical.
Karen, as design director, what are your thoughts on those ideas from Jane?
So I think it's wonderful to hear that airlines are considering this, Jane, because so many women, at least in the US, have left the workforce because of the pandemic. So it's critical to get them back on those projects. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about STEM today, because encouraging women to go into STEM fields will help them thrive in those fields and offer better diversity and product development at the airlines. So you would have female representation across all of those different areas. And it's interesting, you talked about how women are the primary purchasers of leisure travel. That's certainly something that I knew from years and years ago. But I think the teams developing the websites need to think about that and how women purchase things. And then the people who are developing the seats need to think about women's needs and how those seats can accommodate them, as well as the male who's extremely tall. Really, the critical thing about having female representation in all of these different work groups is to prevent biases in the products and services that are being developed, so it appeals to all passengers.
Awesome. Erin, you had mentioned earlier, electric aircraft, and I'm interested to go back to that topic a little bit here. What was the inspiration, I'm wondering, for the work that you're currently doing? Why is this an important pursuit for you?
Yeah, great question. So with the electric airplanes, it's really for me about the innovation. I come from a very innovative family, and so I just felt like a calling for it. Not only that, but the sustainability of electric airplanes and what that brings to the table. There's also a noise issue, with certain communities and residential areas. So this defies that. And I just was so intrigued by the technology. I mean, we're doing it with cars. Why aren't we doing it with planes? So I think it's again about timing, right? It's all about timing and when it's going to be released and approved and certified by the FAA. But with that said, I mean, it just is a domino effect of opportunities there. And I think that once we do get it approved, that it's going to be in the media, very much so. A lot of people are going to start to turn their heads towards aviation and go, oh, wow, like this is happening. And I do believe that there's an opportunity there for women to jump on those opportunities and be a part of the movement into this innovative new years to come.
That's right. That's right.
Add to that, Jane. I mean, I think what Erin's doing is fantastic, because it's not only appealing to, the kind of that generation, but what we hear in Europe a lot is the sustainability issue is so critical to young women making career choices, and being part of that, I think, is so important. And I think it opens up just a whole new avenue. So there's something really great about what Erin's doing, not just from getting more pilots, but getting more pilots on the right equipment and setting that agenda around sustainability. Because for me, diversity is also a really important pillar of a sustainable workforce for the future. So those two are kind of heavily interlinked, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jane, I
Karen,
speak to designers. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say,
No, go
I
ahead.
speak with designers. I speak with designers around the world, and everyone seems to be tremendously focused right now on sustainability. So from an aviation standpoint, people are looking at how do we design our materials to be more sustainable? How can they be recycled, repurposed, reprocessed, and reused, transformed into something that can go back on an aircraft 30 years after that aircraft seat was originally created, as opposed to just going into landfill. So there's a great deal of attention being paid to that right now.
So what I'm hearing too is that obviously, having more opportunities, like I think you had said, Karen, earlier, having more opportunities for women, then we also need to make sure that from that young age, we're letting women know, you can be a pilot, and you can also be, I think some of the examples that we had spoken about previously was maybe a corporate lawyer for an airline, and that there's so many different avenues. So Karen, I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit more information of how you made your way to Sekasui Kydex as design director. How did you enter the aviation industry?
So I basically came to aviation as a fluke. My family did a lot of traveling when I grew up, and I had the travel bug. And my father had been a pilot in World War II, and he had his own Mooney when he was running his own business. I think it was more for fun than to look at job sites, but that's how he explained it. And so I had flying in my blood as well, and I was a fine arts major at UCLA and pursued photography, sort of a second degree through Brooks Institute of Photography, and was very interested in literature, almost had a double major in English in college, and thought that media production was really what I wanted to go into. I had done the Myers-Briggs tests and identified what things I was interested in. And ultimately, we were going through a recession. I was living in Seattle, working for a media production company. And this is a point that I wanted to make for women. At that time, it didn't occur to me to go and look for a job at Boeing. They were literally down the street. And with my love of aviation, I should have gone and talked to them. I regret that now. But I started doing some informational interviewing back in Washington, D.C., and spoke to the corporate producer at Gannett. And he said, oh, there's a job at US Air, which was the fifth major US carrier at the time. And I went over there and I interviewed with their director of advertising and promotions. And she told me about an opportunity, basically doing media production at the airline. And so I went back to Seattle. And because the internet wasn't really up and going at that point, I spent the next 3 months in the public library in Seattle, which luckily had a very robust aviation section because of Boeing, and was thrilled to get hired on there. So I moved back to the DC area and I worked there in 17 years. And just kept defining my path at the airline. So going from working on tchotchkes and posters and ads and direct mail and things like that to ultimately product development and corporate branding. I oversaw the whole name change at US Air to US Airways and worked on several mergers and so forth. Found my way to Phoenix through a merger when they merged with America West, and ultimately another merger through American Airlines. And American had already redone their branding and they were fully staffed up. And so that was an opportunity for me to look for another position outside the airline. And I had been a customer of Secasui Kydex when I was working on aircraft interiors. And they had really done well by me. And I had tried to do several things that I was having difficulty doing. And they said, oh, well, we know someone who does that. They didn't do that at that point. So they sent me in this direction. That didn't work out. So I came back to them and they really helped me do a lot of things that I was struggling with. And so to kind of bring it full circle, now as the design director at Secasui Kydex, I'm essentially functioning as a problem solver for airlines and designers to help them come up with solutions to the challenges that they're facing. And so I love interacting with airlines and designers around the world now. And it's been tremendously fulfilling to be back in aviation after a couple of years. I had stopped and worked for a nonprofit, which was wonderful, but I still had aviation in my blood. For a lot of people who've worked for an airline, once it's in your blood, you can't get it out. So this is a great way for me to interact and continue in the industry. So just lots
Absolutely,
of
and
opportunities. I was
that's
just going to
right.
say that
I was
there's a
going to
lot of emphasis now with things changing. People are looking at single aisle lie flat seating, for example, as a result of the pandemic. So many, many changes coming.
I think it's very inspiring to hear these stories. So I was just going to open it up, Erin, and say, feel free, you guys. I would love to hear some more inspiring stories about why you choose to do what you're doing right now, and why these things are important to you as women behind aviation.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Nice segue, actually, because I wanted to talk about where we're at right now with the aviation industry. In particularly the private charter world, we are seeing a huge increase in business. So, a lot of people over the last year of COVID and everything, last 2 years, have switched to if they can afford it, traveling private. And so we're seeing such an increase. And I think a lot of that has to do with the safety factor. Um, and then people get addicted because it's a luxury way to travel, and it's very nice. And so I'm working with Jet Token right now, and as their executive director of sales for the Pacific Southwest region, we're seeing such a huge demand. And actually just recently in the news, another fractional ownership company that was or is a competitor for Jet Token just came out with another article that they're no longer able to keep up with the demand, so they have to wait list these people. So we are in a huge arena of new clients, and people are coming to us to get a jet card or own a fraction of an airplane. So I love it because obviously it makes my job easier, but it just shows you that there's a lot of opportunity here. And if anybody's ever interested, please feel free to give me a call, because we will be expanding eventually. But for it's a great opportunity for women who have a sales background, um, and are able to understand kind of like the needs of in this industry, and what's going on. But yes, it's expanding. There's opportunity expanding within the private charter world, which is a really fun industry to be a part of. And there is some sustainable options also in like the fuel arena. So not to mention, again, just to recap on the VTOL and electric airplanes that are further down the road. But again, like there's just a lot going on, and we're all staying very busy considering what's happening in our world today.
Absolutely, lots of opportunity, like you said, Erin, for people to get involved. So I also want to know too, sharing these stories, discussing women behind aviation. I'm interested to hear from each of you a little bit about, the importance of collaboration and mentorship. Jane, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I mean, with all of our airlines, one of the things that we say is, of course, our airlines are competing with one another for the customers that are able to travel at the moment. Let's not forget, very many people are not able to cross borders because it's very difficult, it's complicated. So we know that they obviously compete. But what we say around diversity and inclusion is that collaboration is the only thing that's going to get us to actually move the dial on it. So, and for me, that's one of the most rewarding things about this initiative, is that it's a place where actually we can collaborate and share best practices. So really simple things like, what's the best practices in organizations around flexible working? So we know that flexible working, the pandemic opened flexible working in people's minds in a way that we had never been able to do. We talked about flexible working, but this really changed it. I mean, it's like, I can work from anywhere and I can be anywhere. Okay, but we work for airlines. Airlines have schedules. So how are you how are you getting used to this new world where people want flexibility, but we also have an airline to run, and airlines need slots, and they take off at very particular times, and they need to land at particular times. And if your pilot or your crew go over a certain amount of hours that they've worked, then again, they can be stuck in locations, but you've still got this demand for people to work flexibly. So we're having some really interesting discussions about, well, what does flexibility mean? Could it mean flexibility for your office-based staff? And some airlines are being really innovative. They're saying that for office-based staff, perhaps they only need to come in twice a month or once a month. And, and then they have cultural immersion days where they then reconnect with what's going on. Well, that's kind of appealing to people. But again, it's like sharing and collaborating on this stuff, because we all know this. I can open my inbox every morning and I've got loads of different, kind of email summaries from lots of different organizations that are offering lots of information about diversity, equity, and inclusion generally. But aviation is quite unique. And so I think this is really the first time that we've been able to put our cards on the table and say, well, how do we collectively deal with some of these issues that are very, very unique to aviation that you don't tend to see in other areas? Now, I've got a fairly my career can be defined by working in typically male-dominated backgrounds. I worked for an oil company for quite a period of time, and I worked for BP, and they were very progressive on a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And they're also kind of leading the pack on the green agenda, as if you're familiar with BP, that they're doing a lot around that. But again, oil companies, what can we take from them? What could we learn from them? And that's where I see our role as IATA, is collating all of these best practices so that airlines can inspire one another to do better on diversity and inclusion. And I have to say, we've created a lovely kind of network of people that would never have come together ordinarily. And, that is, I think, collaboration is a very female value. Now, I'm not saying that there's not men that aren't great collaborators, but when we think about values, not gender, but we think about typically female values, collaboration is typically a female value. And I think that that's really important when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not to say we should alienate people. And I think that's the other thing that's been tremendous, is we don't have just only women on these agenda items. When we're talking about it, we have a lot of men, and we couldn't do any of the work that we're doing without the collaboration of great senior leaders in organizations that say, I support this, and I am going to do what I need to do in my role as CEO to make sure that we don't drop the ball on any discussions related to diversity. So collaboration works always. It's kind of inter airlines, it's inter levels, it's inter genders, and I think it's so critical, because the last thing we should do is alienate anybody from this debate. We should make it, the last letter of D, E, and I is inclusivity. And we need to also make sure we're bringing everyone along with us too.
Absolutely. Karen or Erin, anything to add on that front?
I can talk a little bit about speaking across the lines at airlines. When I started out in the advertising promotions department, we were never allowed to speak to our counterparts at other airlines because they were concerned about price fixing. And so it was wonderful for me when I moved into product development, because as long as something had been launched and someone could buy a ticket and experience it, your counterparts at other airlines were willing to share some information that could better both carriers. And so it was great to be able to contact other product development people to say, okay, I'm building a spreadsheet about what all the other carriers do on business class seats and the pitch and the width and the this and the that. And people were very good about providing information. And I would say, I'll be happy to share this with you after I assemble it. And so it's kind of exciting to continue the collaboration discussion and see more women entering the industry, because I agree with Jane that I think collaboration is a trait that is something that is embraced by women. And I think more collaboration going forward in the industry can only benefit all of us. So I'm excited to see what happens, and I'm really hoping that those male CEOs that we talked about earlier are actively looking to promote women within the ranks. I think that you can see that happening in other industries, and I'm so looking forward to the day that there is a female CEO of an airline.
Absolutely. So, Erin, obviously you carry the last name Lear, and I'm wondering if you can touch a little bit on, maybe the idea of like entrepreneurship and also mentorship that comes with, belonging to the family that you belong to.
Sure. I just want to touch on what Karen said. Karen, I
Absolutely.
see female CEOs very much in our future. I've got some aspirations for a new Learjet, because Bombardier did discontinue our family jet, the Learjet. That happened during COVID, and it was very sad and very disappointing. But with that said, I also see a trend happening, and I'm watching the trend, and it looks like there's just a strong focus on females right now, not just in aviation, in other industries as well. So I definitely look forward to seeing that. When it comes to growing up in the Lear family, it was a really amazing opportunity for me to be around the Lear hangar out in Stead near Reno, Nevada. So I grew up, basically watching the airplanes take off the tarmac, and that was probably my first memory of being at the airport and hearing a Learjet take off the tarmac and listening to the Pratt and Whitney engines, and thinking to myself, like, and how amazing that power is, like that sound, and it gives you goosebumps, and my hair was standing up on the back of my neck, and I just remember that moment of, whoa, wow, like this is amazing. And that is what inspired me to get into aviation. So I'm really grateful that, I grew up in the Lear family. As interesting as our family is, that was probably the most inspiring moment for me growing up, was hearing those planes take off of the runway. And then, just like I love hearing people's stories about my grandfather and Moya, my grandmother, who was a woman in aviation. And when Bill, my grandfather, passed away of leukemia in 1979, he apparently was holding Moya's hand on his deathbed and was in the process of inventing a plane called the Lear fan. And he said, "Baby, make it fly." And that was like his dying words to her, was to, for her to continue this project and get it off the ground. And what did she do? She got it off the ground. And so, as a uh, not just a Lear, but a female, watching my grandmother and her ability to, be a woman in a predominantly male industry, and people tell you, no, 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 this isn't going to work. And you still push for your dream and you go to make it happen. And that dedication and the drive is in my blood, but also because I was programmed a little bit that way growing up watching that. So with that said, Moya was, she made the Lear fan fly, though it never really went into production. She did foresee that, and followed through with Bill's dream. So, it's quite interesting. I've just always wanted to be a part of the innovation. And I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and with a very strong sales background. And yeah, it's pretty incredible what's happening now. And I, again, just focusing on the innovation factor and bringing more females into aviation, that is my goal. And I've seen it growing up, and I have no doubt that these numbers are going to increase over the years. So I'm really excited.
Thanks, Erin. That's excellent. Speaking of numbers increasing, we've actually got our fourth panelist who has joined us now. So we have Fatty Nuchimosimo with us, who is the founder of the Young African Aviation Professional Association. Hi, Fatty. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Fatty.
So
Hi.
So we've been talking a little bit, obviously, about mentorship, about STEM and educating women and girls. So I'm wondering if we can hear from you, Fatty, a little bit about how the organization that you founded encourages women to join the aviation industry. And then I'm also looking forward to hearing from you, your strong message about each male identifying a woman that they will inspire, empower, and mentor. So take it away, Fatty.
Thank you very much, and sorry for my delay. I had a technical error. It's a pleasure joining you for the the strong message on women behind aviation. Actually, my adventure in aviation has been for 11 years, and Jane has been one of the key person that has made me increase my drive on knowing that what I've been doing is something I need to continue. Until 2010, I had no clue about aviation. I mean, I live in a country of 25 million inhabitants. We have 6 airports. We used to have one of the first airlines in Africa, but it didn't just strike us when we were going to school to aspire to join the industry. So it happened that because of my expertise in my domain, which was general management and administration back then, I became the first female senior staff of our national airlines, Cameco. And, I found myself with a team of expatriates from 8 countries, professionals of aviation. And I remember our commercial director at that time, Christian Pesha, who is French, who said, listen, one thing with aviation, when you get into it, you never get out. And I was like, well, I've done telecom, I've done banking, I've done maritime, so I will definitely still get a better offer and leave. But what struck me most was first, it was very innovative for me, and I realized that it had many careers that people didn't know about. And I realized that all the other industries were actually in the aviation industry. And it struck me. I said that when I was in school, no one told me about this. So we have a lot of young Cameroonians or Africans who are jobless and who just their dream is to go out of the continent. And I said, but when I look at it, we still have a lot to do. So I decided to create a platform that could spread the news because I studied in a rural area in a boarding school. I remember back in school, I had my principal who was British, but who had moved through the volunteering program they had to be the principal of that school in that rural area. So taking at the reality around us, our parents all want us to go to school, but the majority in Africa earn, especially in Cameroon, earn less than 500 US dollars. So they all want us to go to school. So for me, it was painful to see that everyone is going into what everybody talks about and nobody talks about aviation. So 6 months after takeoff, I remember my chief operating officer saying, Fadi, you don't have the technical expertise, but you have the drive we need in aviation. So definitely put you as logistics and procurement manager in maintenance and engineering, but we will make you undergo the on-the-job trainings and all the certifications that you need. That was a challenge, and I was already becoming passionate about this bird flying and so I decided to take the job. Surprisingly, in the whole of time, there was no woman apart from the PA, the personal assistant of the director of maintenance. And that drove me more into wanting to create something that could enable people first know more about aviation and then put a focus on women. Because I was like, when I was in school, I was a science student, and everything they told me about was biology, chemistry, physics, and then you end up being a teacher because we are not more developed where you don't do researches, you don't do innovation. And so I founded the Young African Aviation Professional Association because I had had the privilege to fly across Africa. So I saw the diversity where we could not just generalize that this is what has to be done in Africa. And I thought that if we have representatives in each country, that will help us already from within the continent to identify what we could spread as new, as message, opportunities, get to know more of the training facilities to the others, and then get the support from volunteers out of the continent in the industry. And so I also found out about the Women in Aviation International Organization. So I joined and I started raising awareness, going around organizing every year Girls in Aviation's Day. But the message wasn't, and it's still not very easy to get because when you tell people we need to raise awareness, they like, we can't invest in that. So I took it on myself to say, okay, half of my savings is going to go on my outreach activities. And each time I could travel, I would travel and try to mobilize as many people, tell them there's something we need to do. Africa is a continent that needs to get the development in aviation, and we need to get many more women into the industry in the respective fields. So I started encouraging people of all sectors in the aviation industry to do outreach, invite them on panels, help them share. That mentorship has helped, because I remember when we were launching with Jane the 25 by 2025 campaign in Montreal in 2019, I was proud to present my niece, who was actually lucky to fly to Canada for her studies. And I remember me telling her, you want to do electronics, but why don't you specialize in aviation electronics? Because everyone was into, I want to become an IT engineer. But I said, but yes, you can still be an IT engineer, but in aviation. And I was proud to present her on that day because she's actually an engineer working for Adacel. So she now works on software that manages the airspace management. So people, when she talks now in my events or she talks to other young girls in Africa, they are like, really? So in this space, you can do some applications. And this is actually what drives me every day and gives me the courage not to stop. So it's been a lot of, we have other organizations that are now existing in Africa. We hear more about outreach in Africa. We hear more about people sharing their experiences. Pilots, female pilots now coming out to inspire, female engineers coming out to encourage girls into going into becoming not only flight attendants, but also getting into becoming air traffic controllers. We have a lot of activities ongoing. And this for me has been very inspirational because every day now I find a lot of young girls in the polytechnic schools who reach out to me and who really want me to like give them also orientation. And now to the men, I've been for the past 6 years telling them, you are the leaders in the industry. And if we want to talk, to think as an industry, I just ask each man to take, inspire her, mentor her, and empower her. Because if we keep it as a man kind of a job, then we're gonna lose the industry. And I was saying this before COVID. Now we've been like a year and a half down with COVID. So Jane, I don't think we're gonna say 25 by 2025. It definitely needs to change to be 50 by 2025 because the industry has had a huge impact. And going into innovation, I reach out to the stakeholders and all the passionate people in aviation to say we definitely need to sit down together and ask ourselves, where do we want to see our industry in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years? And then set up a strategy where we reinforce, because COVID has made us understand that what we're doing now, virtual gathering, is very important and that it can make a huge impact. So it's to find a way to ensure that the momentum keeps up. Because with COVID, many also called and said, by the way, planes are not flying anymore. And why should we go into that industry? And no, Africa definitely needs in its development strategy the development of aviation. We need to inspire many more young Africans to think that the industry is not just meant for a special class of people, but it's an industry that's actually a catalyst to the development of the other industries. Because if we want to encourage investors to come and invest in our native countries, what do they need? They need assurance that they can fly into the country in and out at any time, establish their industries. That will create jobs. So I tell them, and I also talk to governments, I tell them, until all African governments put aviation in the center of their development, we definitely will not be able to attain the objectives that Africa in general through its Agenda 2063 is working on. So aviation normally now is the only factor, even though COVID hit us hard, is the only industry that is supposed to be rebuilding the momentum for the construction of our economies. We saw during the crisis, the only industry that could like bring the vaccines across the world was aviation through cargo. So I see this opportunity to make everyone understand that there is a great need for governments to really focus on empowering the next gen, especially in Africa, review the collaboration strategies with the developed countries so that we too will be part of it, and then see how together we can get this industry to the summit. Because you can't talk communication if you have an emergency with a part that needs to repair a satellite or something somewhere, it's aviation. If you want to carry a technician from one point to the other, it's aviation. So I tell everyone that I'm so lucky that I was able to get into this industry 11 years ago, but we need to inspire more women, especially who think that they don't have a role apart from being flight attendants, but to understand that every single bit of the aviation and aerospace industry is also an opportunity for them. And with this, we will be able to sustain the growth of our industry and improve the lives of many people.
What a shame we've lost Fadi, but I just kind of want to pick up what she was saying, which is, she's done such a lot of strong grassroots work, and I think this is what we need. We need the ability to take the phenomenal work that Fadi does at the grassroots to inspire girls to get into aviation and match it with these kind of big, more kind of ecosystem questions. And Fadi alluded to it. If your average salary is $500 a month, it gets really, really difficult to say, well, I want to be a pilot and take on $100,000 worth of debt. Now, it's not always $100,000, but it's not far from it. That's a very big stretch. And then that means that you exclude, if we think about excluding access, we're excluding a whole group of people who just simply haven't got economic access to become pilots. So you're missing out on a phenomenal talent pool. And and Fadi does some absolutely fantastic work on really bringing that passion. I think that if she could, she would inspire the whole of Africa to be flying. And again, Erin, I'm thinking back to the great work that you're doing on getting more female pilots. I'm not sure if you're aware, United ran a campaign earlier this year where they explicitly said we are going to make money available for female pilots to get them to be kind of, more easier access to it, because I think it's still, there's some systemic problems that we don't always talk about, and we must start talking about them if we're to address the problem.
Yeah, I agree 100%. United also came out with an article where they had put a huge deposit on some electric airplanes. So, with that said, yeah, I think, when I think more about females and why are they not in this, it's not just financially, it's also because a lot of females are, you know, bringing other humans into this world, and that creates sometimes an issue. But I think with what you're saying with financials, I think that if we could get some really wealthy individuals and or government to provide some of those funds, that's solution number one. The second solution would be, again, like timing wise with these electric airplanes coming out, not just for training, but for the cost of travel. I think that there's going to be just like a huge shift in some of the numbers in terms of affordability for all this stuff and the excitement around aviation and what's happening. So, yeah, I think, man, if we could just get the government to, and some of the really wealthy individuals in this world to hear us and hear what we need to say, and this is what we need, that's going to be one of the solutions to providing that. And then just let me touch again really quickly on females, not to go too much off topic, but females who are, wanting to start families and stuff, and not take on a career in traveling industry because they feel like they're going to be away from their families. Well, I think that with the use of the VTOL and electric aviations on the horizon, that a lot of those companies are going to, the startups are going to start, short point to point distances. So we're going to need pilots. There's a huge need for pilots. And if we don't get ahead of the curve now, we're going to run into a little bit of an issue with these companies. But those opportunities to do those short point to point to air taxi, so to speak, companies are going to need pilots. And that's going to make it easier for women to kind of wrap their head around, well, I can do it all. You know what I mean? Or like, if I need to be a self-sustainable woman, then, this is a great opportunity. And again, yes, the main issue I think is financially speaking is one of the bigger things to wrap our heads around. So I think if we can get some grants and some wealthy individuals to support this cause, like to help shift these numbers, that's really the solution.
And Erin, I think, when we think about remotely operated planes as well, there's still, we still have two people in the flight deck, but what if
Mhm.
that dynamic changes? And what if the way in which we kind of actually manage the flight process isn't, isn't both people in the cabin at the same time, but perhaps you have partial remote operations of planes? Again, it's like all these things could be open for
Mhm.
debate. And as you say, shorter point to point routes, drone operations, could drone operations be something, because we know that they're really important in the future? Could that be something that becomes appealing to women? And I think that we have to put everything on the table. It feels like we need to
Yeah.
do the best sales job ever on the industry that we all love, so that everybody else loves it as much as we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also STEM, and getting involved into those fields is there's huge opportunities, and we are going to need all of that. And so it's a great opportunity for great timing for females, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I think, Erin, the point that you made about women who do want families, I don't think that that's off topic at all. I think for a lot of women, that's something that is front and center in their career. So I think that that's a very excellent point. We've got some time here, and I'm thinking it would be fantastic for us to do a little bit of a general, roundtable discussion here on the future of aviation in general. So, Karen, do you want to start with this one?
I think there are wonderful things ahead for aviation. And I think one of the challenges that we need to address is the fact that so many pilots are set to retire in the next few years. So, going back to what Erin was saying, I think we need to find a way to encourage more people to pursue becoming pilots and making it financially accessible to them. And so, ideally, there would be some sort of program where people could enter that field in kind of a creative process. I've been seeing some things on the news now where major corporations like IBM are very short staffed, and so they're getting creative about approaching people who don't have degrees and bringing them in and training them and giving them the skills that they need to do the work of an engineer at IBM, because they need those warm bodies in there doing that work. And so um, clearly being a pilot is a highly trained profession, but how can we bring new people in to fill those um, seats that are going to go empty moving forward in the next few years? And I think there are many women who would be interested in that. And I think the financial issue is the crux of it, but there are clearly companies that are being more creative about how they're going about that. So perhaps when airlines find that they can't replace the pilots who are retiring, they can reach out to women and encourage them to consider becoming pilots. Erin, what do you think about that? What opportunities are there for that?
Yeah,
You talked about people with deep pockets, but what else can airlines do?
well, I mean, just creating scholarships, that type of stuff is really where my head's at in terms of creating that opportunity, you know? What was your second part question?
That was it basically, just how we
Okay.
can achieve that, because you had talked about people with deep pockets, but I don't know that a lot of extremely wealthy people are just going to subsidize women going into flight school. And so how do we encourage
Right.
all
No,
of the
yeah.
airlines working together? Maybe Jane can speak to that. How can they
Yeah.
how can they collaborate to fill um, those seats that the pilots are leaving as they retire?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fight for talent is going to get real, as you say. And of course, the issue is that it's not as attractive as an industry as perhaps it was. We're competing with a whole, 10 years ago, no kid said, I want to be an Instagrammer or I want to be a YouTuber, and I'm going to make my money by taking videos of my life, or I'm going to make money taking videos of me playing my favorite video game. Like, we hadn't even thought that was a possibility, and yet actually this is where we are, and that's kind of what we're competing with. There's a whole emergence of a sector maybe we call it entertainment, maybe we call it something else, but there's a whole sector that's emerging and developing that is ultimately competing with people who want to get into aviation. And I'm saying that with no judgment. It's not right or it's wrong. But the traditional places where we would compete for talent are no longer the traditional places that we would compete. So I think we've got to get really, really inventive on how do we make it a really attractive proposition for people to come into, where they can say, actually, all of those skills I can flex in aviation. Aviation is the place that I can have multiple careers, as we've said throughout this. But it's the kind of getting them in through the door in the first place, because, as Fadi so nicely said, one of her mentors said, as soon as she was, in aviation, you're not going to leave. And, I think, Erin, your description of like hearing Learjets go off and being, kind of, that's the soundtrack to your childhood is really evocative. It builds an emotional connection. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to build it so that they say, actually, I want to be the flight Instagrammer, or, whatever it is. I want to create that connectivity with the industry, and I wish I had the answer. I really wish I had the answer, but I think through collaboration, talking to one another, we could have the answers. Erin, do you have the answer?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to, but the gears are turning. But I was gonna say that maybe it would be a good idea to offer some sort of incentive program within airliners, where if you're a female pilot, that there's some sort of special fund or funds that go into a marketing campaign that has to do with inspiring females in aviation, or not just females, but people, I think that the aerospace and aviation industry needs a little bit of a facelift. And I feel like, for me personally, that's what I'm doing with Jet Blondie. That's what, I'm doing on Instagram, is kind of being this new female who just, is getting her pilot's license, and talking about the experience of it and how cool it actually is, and how I never really thought I could do that. You know what I mean? I'll leave you guys with this. I had an aha moment when I was doing my solo cross country, and I landed from Torrance into Palomar, which is in San Diego area. And I landed, and the tower started yelling at somebody on the radio. And I was thinking, oh man, what the hell did I do? Right. And it actually wasn't me. They were yelling at another man pilot. And I had this moment where I just started like dancing, and I was like, I did it. And that moment was so precious to me. And I'll never forget it, because that was the moment where I was like, I can do this. And if I can do this, multiple other people can do this. So with that said, I don't know, maybe one of the solutions could be, creating a marketing fund for not just me or other influencers like me, but for maybe female pilots within, I don't know, some of the airliner industries, and being able to, do more media and press on that, so that we can get more people excited about aviation through media.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. That story, like, my eyes teared up a little bit. I got chills. So very inspiring to hear. Thank you for sharing that one. And thank you to everybody who joined today. We had Jane from IATA. We have Erin from Jet Blondie. We have Karen from Secasui Kydex. And we had Fadi as well from the Young African Aviation Professional Association. So thank you to everybody for joining today. I was thrilled to be included in this Women Behind Aviation panel. Thank you so much. I am truly looking forward to what the industry has to hold. So thank you again.